In the summer of 2025, at a cave in northern Spain, an archaeologist held a fragment of bone no larger than a coin, a child's neck vertebra, 850,000 years old. Carved into its surface was a pattern, not random, surgical. The incisions were placed at the exact anatomical points required to sever a human head from its body. The child was between 2 and 4 years old, and someone decapitated this toddler with the same technical precision they would use on a deer. This was not a burial, this was butchery, and the child's remains were found beside the bones of at least 9 other people, all processed the same way. Here is the question you are not supposed to ask. Was this an isolated moment of horror? Or does the archaeological record reveal something darker about how your species has treated its young? The answer is in the bones, and the bones do not lie. Dr. Palmira Saladier is the co-director of excavations at Gran Dolina cave in Spain. Her team has been working this site for decades, pulling fragments of human bone from sediment layers nearly 1 million years old. When they found the child's vertebra, the cut marks were immediately recognizable. They had seen this signature before, on deer bones, on horse bones, on every animal the ancient humans of Gran Dolina butchered for food. The cuts were deliberate, the angles were precise. The child had been disarticulated, defleshed, and consumed by members of the species Homo antecessor, and this child was not alone. Nearly 1/3 of all human bones recovered from that layer show the same marks, 10 individuals minimum, adults and children, all processed as food. You want to believe this was survival, starvation, desperation. The evidence suggests otherwise. Move forward in time, 800,000 years later. The cave system at Gough in Belgium holds 99 fragments of Neanderthal bone. Every single piece tells the same story. Leg bones smashed open to extract marrow, rib cages scraped clean with stone blades, skulls cracked apart to access the brain. The processing technique is identical to the way these same Neanderthals butchered reindeer and wild horses. This was not a burial, this was a meal. Isotope analysis of the teeth revealed something more disturbing. The victims were not members of the local group. They were outsiders, captured, brought to this cave, and consumed. The pattern of who was selected and who was spared was not random. It was deliberate. It was systematic. And it happened again and again. But the cave that changes everything is Gough's cave in Somerset, England, 14,700 years ago. The evidence here does not fit the survival narrative at all. Dr. Sylvia Bello of the Natural History Museum in London led the analysis. Her team found human bones chewed by human teeth, ribs cracked open for marrow, skulls processed for their contents. And then they found 3 human skulls that had been turned into drinking cups, not smashed, not broken apart in hunger, meticulously shaped. The faces were peeled away with stone tools. The jagged edges of the cranium were chipped and smoothed into a perfect drinking rim. This was not survival, this was craftsmanship. The same site yielded something even stranger, a human forearm bone. First, the flesh was carefully filleted away. Then, someone engraved a deliberate zigzag pattern into the cleaned bone using a stone tool. Only after the engraving was complete was the bone broken open to suck out the marrow. The sequence matters. Art first, food second. This was not starvation cannibalism. This was ritual. Museum researcher Dr. Sylvia Bello used 3-dimensional microscopy to reconstruct every step. The engraving was not an afterthought. It was an intrinsic part of the ritual itself. A study published in Quaternary Science Reviews examined 59 sites across Europe from this same time period. Dr. William Marsh and his team at the Natural History Museum found something unexpected. The practice of consuming human remains was not random. Groups carrying a specific genetic signature, called Goyet Q2, consumed their dead as a funerary rite. Groups with different ancestry, living at the same time in the same regions, buried their dead in the ground. The choice to eat or to bury was not about food, it was about identity. It was inherited culture, a profound and deliberate way of honoring the dead that separated one people from another. But ritual cannibalism of adults is one thing. What ancient humans did to their children is something else entirely. In Carthage, at a site called the Tophet, archaeologists have excavated thousands of urns containing the cremated remains of infants and young children. For over a century, scholars have debated whether these children were sacrificed or simply buried after natural death. The question is not whether the Carthaginians were capable of cruelty. The question is whether a grieving mother and a murderer leave behind the same archaeological signature. Physical anthropologist Jeffrey Schwartz examined the bones and concluded most were stillborn or died within the first month of life. Natural deaths, mourned losses. Patricia Smith, another anthropologist, analyzed the same remains and found something different. Many of the children had lived for months. They had been named, they had been fed, they had teeth that showed weeks of growth. And then they were placed in the fire. At the sanctuary of Tharos in Sardinia, nearly half the urns contained the remains of lambs. Substitutes, a desperate bargain to spare a living child. The practice was not a Roman invention or propaganda. It was a ritualized system that persisted for nearly 600 years. A covenant between a parent and a god, written in the bones of the firstborn. But the site that removes all ambiguity is 1,400 miles west, beneath the Yucatan Peninsula. In 1967, workers building an airstrip near Chichén Itzá broke through the limestone into a hidden chamber. Inside, packed into a space no larger than a small room, were the bones of more than 100 children. For 50 years, the assumption was that these were young girls, sacrificed to the rain god Chak, offerings to bring water to the crops. That assumption was based on mythology, not evidence. In June of 2024, archaeogeneticist Rodrigo Barquera from the Max Planck Institute published the DNA analysis. 64 children sequenced. The results were unambiguous. Every single one was male. Not mostly male. Not primarily male. 100% male. Many were between 3 and 6 years old, and at least a quarter of them were closely related. Brothers, cousins, children from the same families. The pattern held for 5 centuries. Generation after generation, families brought pairs of young boys to the priests. The ritual calendar dictated the timing. The myth of the hero twins demanded the offering. These children were brothers or cousins, drawn from the same households, fed identical diets in their final weeks. This was not punishment. This was not cruelty in the way you understand it. This was the highest honor a family could offer. The gods required the ultimate gift to keep the cosmos in balance, and the families who gave their sons were marked forever as chosen. You want to separate yourself from this. You want to call it primitive. You want to believe that modern humans are fundamentally different from the people who carved drinking cups from skulls or fed their children to the gods. But the engraved bone from Gough's cave is 14,000 years old. Chichén Itzá was operating a millennium after the fall of Rome. Carthage was a maritime superpower with libraries and engineering that rivaled anything in the Mediterranean. These were not simple people. They were not ignorant. They were not you minus technology. They were fully human, fully intelligent, fully capable of love, art, philosophy, and mathematics. And they processed their children as resources. The psychohistorian Lloyd Demoz opened his work on the history of childhood with a single line. The history of childhood is a nightmare from which we have only recently begun to awaken. He was not being poetic. He was providing a clinical diagnosis. The evidence from Gran Dolina, Gough, Gough's cave, Carthage, and Chichén Itzá is not a collection of anomalies. It is not a series of isolated horrors separated by time and geography. It is a pattern, a clinical record of a species that for hundreds of thousands of years, across continents, across cultures, across evolutionary branches, processed its own young with the same deliberate efficiency it used on animals. The question is not whether this happened. The bones answer that. The question is what it means that for the vast majority of human existence, this was normal, and what it means that you are separated from that normalcy by only a few generations.